Welcome back. As you've seen this morning, we'll talk a lot in different moments about citizen engagement, about models of participation, and how they can create an alternative somehow to the discourse of the smart city. This is something that has featured heavily on Dan's Hill opening keynote. So in a way, this session is all about that. It's about contrasting models and experiences, technologies and forms of engagement to include citizens in different ways and through different mechanisms in the processes that we are developing to create new paradigms of how do we understand the city, how do we manage it, how do we make it a space for collaboration in many different ways and paradigms. We have three speakers from different backgrounds with a lot of experience in this context. This session is going to be actually a bit longer than some of the one this morning, so we're going to have more time for discussion and more time for, say, a presentation that will be a bit longer. And in order to sort of set out the territory, or to define the space that we're going to be talking about, the first speaker is Martijn de Waal. He's a researcher on cities. He's the founder of the Waal City project, and actually he's an advisor to the UrbanixD project that is taking care of this session, that is supporting this session. So, Martijn.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me, and thanks for coming out to this session. I'm just waiting for my slides to appear. Yeah, there they are. I'm actually going to talk about some research that I did for a book I've been writing, The City as Interface. It's coming out in May of this year, the English version. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you on a research tour that I did last winter, December actually, to Seoul. And my talk is called A Tale of Three Cities, or Three Tales About One City. What I would like to do is I'm going to take you to three parts of Seoul. Here they are: Songdo, Hongdae, and Seoul City Hall. And in all these parts of Seoul, they have different versions, different ways of thinking of what a smart city is and how citizens should be engaged with new technologies in the city. And I thought it would be interesting to kick off with comparing these various design paradigms, you could call them, or design approaches. And I think most of you are maybe unfamiliar with the geography of Seoul, so I put on Gangnam at the map as well, so you know the relative place of what I'm talking about. Basically, what I want to do is I want to pick up where Dan Hill sort of left the question this morning. He said we can make technology do anything, so what should we do? And I will show that in these three various parts of Seoul, they're doing different things with these technologies. So basically the question is, what do we want from our cities with these smart technologies? Do we want our traffic lights, to be maybe show some emotions or to talk to us, or do we want them to guide us as efficiently as possible through the city? That's a possible alternatives that came up this morning. And I'll do that by showing you these three cities. I'll just briefly introduce you to them, and then I'll take a more into-depth look. The first one is Songdo. Who of you have heard of Songdo? About half of you. Songdo, it's an interesting place. It's a new project, and it's being heralded as one of the first large smart cities that's being developed. A huge investment project, I think about $35 billion, real estate project off the coast, and being built right now. The second one is Hongdae, which used to be a leafy suburb of Seoul, but has been turned into a vibrant urban part of the city. And immediately I think you see the difference between the two, right? If you look at these pictures and this one. These are just Google searches for the two parts of the city. But I'll come back to that later. And then after that I'll go to City Hall and I'll tell you a little bit more about how the Seoul government, or city government, is approaching the smart city approach. And if you look at these pictures, you see it's a bit of a mix, right? Here you see mainly master plan buildings. Here you see lots of people who are appropriating the city from the bottom up, so to speak. And here you see a nice mix of institutional buildings and of people who are actually taking over places and doing the things that they want to do themselves. And those three approaches we will also see in the stories themselves. So let's go to Songdo. Let's start off. As I said, it's being heralded as one of the first smart cities. And if you look at the pictures that are there, you see lots and lots of rendered pictures like this, and you start to ask yourself, does it actually exist? I mean, is it really there, or is it just schemes of master planners who want to build that city? And actually, it does exist. This is what it looked like in December last year. The only thing is, what I found out when I came there is that although many people have been talking about how Songdo is an example of the smart city of the future, there actually wasn't any smart city technology yet, which was a bit surprising. There was a lot of talk about it. It's being picked up in a lot of conversations about what is good and what is bad about the smart city approach. But if you go there, there is hardly any smart city there. I mean, there are some garbage containers that if you want to throw away your trash, you have to use a special card with an RFID chip, so then the container can measure how much trash you throw out, and the heavier it is, the more you have to pay. But that's about it. And still, we've seen so many reports and discussions and talks about it. And I was one of them. I was one of the reporters being actually sent for a Dutch newspaper to write that story. And usually, what we come up with then as reporters is stories like this. And this is the vision that's behind Songdo as well, that the city will start to collect data about everything we do, and that data then can be used to make the city smarter or more efficient. So, for instance, this is an article from a German newspaper, and they describe, there is sensors in the pavement so that if people walk by, then the traffic lights will go on, and then if there's no people, the traffic lights will go out. Or there is all these sensors that sense where the cars are, and they will guide them automatically to parking places. And it's still not there, but they're actually working on it, and that's, in a way, that's why it is interesting to talk about it, because there's big companies behind it, and they're really rolling out technologies that, even though they're still not there, there is a particular vision behind them and that they're working on. Although the example also shows that it's a lot harder to actually realize those visions than they maybe thought, because they've been talking about this since 2003, 2004. And to give you an idea of the vision behind it, I will show you a short film clip where they will explain what the smart city will do for you as a user, consumer, citizen. This was one of the first incarnations. I think their plans have changed a little bit over the years. This video was produced in 2004, 2005, but it's still on the website of the company who's developing the smart city technology. But they have changed their approach a little bit. But let's have a look at what their vision is of what a smart city should be.
But the U-line values this small difference. Now, it's time to begin having a 100% safe life. You can protect your precious children anytime, anywhere using video monitoring. Driving becomes safer with intelligent navigation services that switch automatically between road navigation and parking information. Intelligent CCTV service uses motion detection technology to identify suspicious activity and automatically informs related organizations to deal with the situation promptly.
Well, this goes on a little further. So what you see is an image of a city which really is about making the city safer, 100% safe, like they even promise the future residents of the place, making it more efficient, etc., etc. And it's interesting because they approach a city, basically a sentence that's useful is the city as a service. So the city is a bunch of infrastructure, roads, safety, maybe education as well, and we're going to sell that to you as individual consumers, and you can buy or you can subscribe to some of the services. The people with Cisco I've been talking to, for example, at Songdo, they said one of the things they were thinking was we're going to develop a small bracelet for children, a friendship bracelet, and it has a chip in there, so then you as a parent, you can always know where your child is. And if he leaves the school compound when he's not allowed to, you will get an SMS to your phone, and we're going to sell that to you. You can subscribe to that for $5 or euros or whatever a month. So the idea really is to collect all this data and then use that to develop services. And they're calling it smart and connected communities. That's their frame under which they're branding it. But actually, if you ask them what they mean by community, it shows that they're very much a business approach, because then they will tell you that the good thing about it is that we create this data platform, because that's what the companies like Cisco do, and then all kind of companies can build services on top of that, and then the life of people will be better, and we have economic growth, and we have more jobs, and that will make the community a better place. And of course, I mean, there's some truth to that, of course. But it's also a bit limited view, this idea of a data platform. And one of the things that I'm a bit concerned about is also, I mean, who is owning this data platform? Because the city is collecting all these data, or in this case, a joint venture between various companies, and they're allowing businesses to build services on top of that. And some of those services, I mean, they might be handy. I mean, you might even want to pay for, finding a parking place without much ado. But what if you want to do something else, something that's not, thought out by the companies themselves? You say, as a group of citizens, you want to use that data, for example, to organize an action group against environmental pollution, because there will be a lot of data in the system, of course, about what's happening with the CO2, etc., etc. Can you do that, yes or no? And if you ask questions like that, then the answer you get is not quite clear. They say, yeah, maybe in the future we will do that, but for the time being, it seems that this data platform is going to be a closed platform, and it's going to be used for businesses to build services on top of it. And the people in Songdo, I mean, they're mainly addressed as consumers rather than as citizens. And there is not much room for you to appropriate the data set so far. But again, I said, it's still, most of it is science fiction right now. I mean, there are large teams, so I think they are working on it. So I think eventually something will materialize. And maybe it will be more open than it looks like right now. But one of my concerns would really be, the openness in the way of citizens themselves to actually get access to those data sets and do with that what they want to do as citizens rather than as consumers as well. And after I visited Songdo, I traveled to a different part of Seoul, Hongdae. And Hongdae is very different. Hongdae is not this big master plan community where the planners have thought out, what you should do where, but which is a vibrant part of the city, and it's very interesting how it became that way. And I think developers in urban data and also people in policy can learn from it. What's interesting about Hongdae is that up until 10 or 15 years ago, it used to be a very leafy suburb with houses like this. So it was divided into plots, and every plot had a house, and around the house you had a little wall, and that's how Korean suburbs and cities looked like for a long time. And it was a little bit away from the city, from the city center at that time. But of course, Seoul, the economy has really grown a lot, and a lot of people have moved to the city. I think it has about 20 million people by now, the whole metropolitan area. So there was huge pressure on all parts of the city to really take up more people and become more urban. And that happened, amongst others, in Hongdae. And Bart Reuser of Next Architects has done a study, and I'm going to show you a few examples of it, because it's really very interesting to see how the city actually did this adaptation. And what he shows in his book is that some of the buildings, what happened is there were all these buildings, and then people started to develop all kinds of adds-on onto these buildings to absorb new practices that started emerging in that part of the city. So for example, this is a basic structure with, I think it was a garage downstairs, and what they did is then they built this little add-on And here you can see it. This is the building in 2009, and underneath there's parking garages. And then they put this whole little extension on top of it. Here's another example. You see one of those old, more or less courtyard houses, and they put a big block on top of it. So this is what it looked in 2009, and this is what it looks like right now. You can't even recognize it anymore, because this huge block building is put on top. And this is the one that I showed you just now, 2009, and this is what it looks like right now. Again, they put up a whole new framework of bars, cafes, little shops, studios, a lot of creative class companies are actually started working there, and of course there has this whole discussion about gentrification as well. But why am I showing you this? I'm showing you this because it shows you how a city can adapt, how it can change from a suburb to a bigger, to a really urban place, which is very vibrant. And I'm showing you it also because it didn't happen by itself. Dan Hill earlier talked about dark matter, about the regulation and the building codes, and again that played a very important part in this whole process. What happened was that people in Seoul were actually started doing these kind of things, these add-ons, and some of them weren't officially allowed by the building code, or they were trying to stretch the rules of the building code, but the people who were making the building codes, they were very adaptive to what happened. So they saw that, okay, this is what people are doing in that part of the city, and we see indeed that there is a need for urbanization, so we're going to adapt the building code. So there was a constant conversation, you could say, between people just adapting the city for their own use, and then the building code sort of adapting to that or trying to steer it in a particular way. So there was a very adaptive way of urban planning, or of actually coding the city. And what I find interesting about that is that the people in the government, I mean, they approach the city as a platform, where all the citizens, they engage all kinds of activities. They're entrepreneurial, they set up cultural activities, they set up all kinds of small markets, etc. And they're trying to give a place for that within their legal framework, which is very different from the first approach, the smart city approach, or the master plan, where there is a top-down plan. This is the data sets, this is what we think that you can do with it. Here it was the other way around. People were doing things with it, and then the government started to adapt to that. And it's a difference between city making and city management. I think where Songdo is very much about city management so far, making everything more efficient. Hongdae is very much about city making, about allowing the people who live there to actually make the city themselves, and then designing the legal code to facilitate that. And I think that's a lesson that developers of smart cities should take from this part of the city. How can you open up your code and make the platform that you're developing open, that it can adopt to many of the bottom-up practices. We're going to move on, we have 4 more minutes, we're going to move on to Seoul City Hall. There I talked with one of the vice mayor, and he explained to me their approach to smart cities. And it's interesting because he used to be the director of a large national program on the development of smart cities in Seoul, but he said that the way that they used to approach it didn't really work for them. It was very much focused on technology and getting the technology out there, and of course there was a government investment agenda behind that, because they wanted to push the Korean companies to be the first ones to bring out these new technologies. But they said, yeah, we relied too much on the technology, and we started to change. Rather than building all this infrastructure that's purely technology, we start to engage citizens themselves to actually contribute. And what they have done in Seoul, they set up a huge monitoring center of the city, where they use all kinds of incoming media, and they monitor Twitter, Facebook, social media, etc., but also official sensors from that they have in the city. So they have this control room basically, so they can see what's happening in the city, and then if a problem arises, then they can react to that. But they say, well, the sensors and the information that we have, it's actually not good enough. And one of the examples he gave, for example, was in Seoul we have lots of floodings when the rain season is there, and of course we have sensors ourselves in the city that tell us when particular areas are flooded, and we go out there and try to do something about it. But they also set up special websites for citizens to report flooding. So they try to merge the data of citizen reporting and official sensors, try to merge it into one, and then try to react to that. But also, they also do it the other way around. Another interesting example he gave was, he said, at a certain point they discovered that some of the asphalt that they had been using in the city contained too much radiation. But they didn't know exactly where that was in the city. So what they then started to do is they thought, okay, we're going to engage some environmental groups. We can actually reach out to some environmental groups in the city, and we're going to ask them to report or to work with us to find where there is some problem with the asphalt, so we can do something about it. So what they're doing there is really trying to open up a system where citizens can contribute and where the city listens to the citizens and tries to react. And if you report a problem, then after that, maybe somebody will go out to repair it, and then he will also take a picture that he has repaired it, and he will send it back to you, so you know, hey, my problem is fixed. And they're really listening to citizens. And it's not just about problem solving, it's also about engaging communities such as the environmental communities to use the data that they're collecting, matching them with the official data to actually improve the city. So they engage the citizens as citizens and not as consumers, and they have created really this open platform on top of which all kinds of initiatives can rise and can be built. So very contrary to the original example of Sondo, what have been given. And they're using computer code to focus on public value rather than on selling services to the citizens. And that's, to conclude, I think that comes very close to a design approach that in the Netherlands with the organization The Mobile City we've been trying to promote when talking about smart cities. We did a conference last year called Social Cities of Tomorrow, where we asked some of the same questions that we're asking here today. How can we go beyond this smart city paradigm of efficiency, etc. And we said that, I think for designers of cities, this should really be the question. How can we use this new media technology to engage and empower publics, groups of people to act on communally shared issues? And I want to leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Martin, for this series of examples which actually started to set up models, which in a way is what this session is going to be about discussing existing different models. The next presentation is by Usman Haque, who is, I have to say, a good friend of this organization from a long time. Usman wears two hats depending the day or the moment. With Haque Design and Research, with his practice as an artist and an architect, he's developed specifically big-scale public space participatory projects, mostly in the context of art, for many years. But he also been the founder of one important project that probably many of you are aware of, COSM, formerly known as Patch Bay, a platform for distributed sensing that allows citizens to gather and broadcast data in different contexts and for different situations. Usman is also a great thinker on the state of this discussion that we have been having since this morning, and I really enjoy his text on the matter. So thanks a lot, Usman. All yours.
Thanks very much for the. So I'm going to talk about messy cities, in praise of messy cities. The task of this session is to discuss open data and its relationship to cities, and perhaps to talk about the strategies that we might want to see brought about in cities. And as Jose Luis was kind of explaining, I suppose part of the reason I'm talking in this session is that I was the founder of something called COSM, originally called Patch Bay, which is essentially a kind of data broker where citizens can measure, can store and share data from sensors such as weather stations, energy monitors, radiation monitors, what have you. Whatever they want to plug in, they can. This is just this is my own feed coming from home. You can have a console where you are monitoring other people's data, and there's now, I think there's something like 100 million data points per day coming in all over the world. And if I just run this, you'll actually see what we call our fire hose. So these are data points coming in as we speak from all around the world, all sorts of devices. So I often have to correct the impression that Patch Bay or COSM was about making data public. Because what it was about for me really was about the public making the data. Because it's that act of measuring that I think is the most important part. Now, as Jose Luis alluded to, I do sometimes wear another hat, which is as a designer, an artist, an architect, building large-scale urban spectacles. So given that I have an interest in data and an interest in spectacles, you might find it a little strange that what I'm going to do is rail against data spectatorship. First, let's talk a little bit about what's actually happening. Oh, by the way, the subtitle for this talk is Grub Street and the Super Wicked. So, what's actually happening in terms of these sort of open data infrastructures? I know more about what's happening in the US because there's a lot more, as far as I can tell, sharing between cities going on there. What with the data.gov platform and Socrata. What you often see is that the reason why first people want to have data about the cities is it's often justified through the need for cities that are efficient and convenient and secure. And you will have probably noticed in that video for Songdo over there that it referred specifically to these kinds of things. So there's this idea that just by having this data, we're going to make these sort of more efficient, secure, and convenient cities. And then there's also a call for openness in this data. And this largely comes about because of this idea of transparency, about shifting the balance of power once the data is no longer locked up. And in some sense, it's about reducing uncertainty and conflict, because once more data is available, people will be able to see what's going on in different domains and what have you. The problem with this kind of approach for me is that it assumes that if we had enough data, we could make perfect decisions, as if there were the notion of a perfect decision. And so there's this kind of attempt to measure as much as possible in order to cover every single knowable parameter. And this kind of desire, I think, I see stretching all the way from the Enlightenment project, which was essentially a project that claimed there was such a thing as rationality and truth. And if you follow the philosophy of it, you can trace it directly to the paradigm that's often quoted today, that data inevitably leads to information and inevitably leads to knowledge, and without a doubt leads to some kind of wisdom. And so this move to use data to understand and explain and control our cities, I think has largely come about because the city managers and even other people who are perhaps running organizations, or even you in your own home, would be able to say, it's not me, it's the data. The data is impartial. It's making the decision for me. I've got enough data that the solution, and I use that word for a reason, becomes indisputable. Now, what's interesting to me is that Borges has actually, in so many different stories, has kind of covered this, the problem of the infinite parameters, or the infinite objects and the finite parameters. You know, there's his map metaphor, the library metaphor, the encyclopedia metaphor. And what he sort of alludes to is this idea that if we only had a good enough index to all of that data, that somehow we'd be able to find those solutions. And so what I see specifically in the open data movement is this idea that by opening up the data, someone else or someone is going to be able to find the solution because it resides in the data. Someone else is going to solve this. Often when a local government releases the data, it's, you know, with the sort of assumption that, well, we'll sort of make it available to a bunch of hackers and they're going to solve life's mysteries. However, whenever it's a little controversial, whenever the data that's released is controversial, or whenever the data that's liberated is controversial, then you find things like what happened to Aaron Swartz, Bradley Manning, Andrew Auernheimer. In other words, anything that seems to me to be actually useful is the thing that gets clamped down. The data that does get released, you know, things like transportation data and, okay, you know, MPs' expenses and things like that, it's largely harmless. right? And you could actually look at this as simply letting people let off steam. Like, here's a bit of data, right? We're being open. We're enabling you to sort of shine the light of the sun onto this data set. And so, for me, what I actually see in this kind of open data movement is what I would call the society of the data spectacle, which actually discourages participation in some senses, which actually means that you no longer question what was the curating process that actually amassed all that data for you and made it available. Who measured it? Why did they measure it? How did they measure it? What were their goals?
Are there slides at this presentation?
No.
Oh, got it, sorry.
Not too late.
I keep seeing you touch your monitor.
I've got notes on one, and I've got the... I can show you my notes if you like. So part of the part of the problem here is that you have no idea what the feedback is from making that data available. And Morozov in his book recently pointed out something very interesting, which he found in an insurance what do you call it, when you go out and questionnaire, that there was a move to make crime statistics open and publicly available, which was great. You know, people were able to know which neighborhoods were had higher or lower crime rates. Now, of course, it's not like you can just move when you find out that you're in a high crime neighborhood. At least not if you're not particularly cash liquid. But what happened next was that the property prices in those areas where the crime statistics have become available started to drop. So what happened in the areas where there was the most crime? People stopped reporting the crimes. So you have this feedback which is not necessarily accounted for when you simply make the data open. And so you have a bit of a prisoner's dilemma here, which is that whoever makes that data open first, whether it's a city versus another city or whether it's a domain against another domain, gets penalized the most. And it leads to what Russell Haque has referred to, kind of in a different domain, so I'm misappropriating his term, but he talks about inactivists, not activists, but inactivists, because you kind of feel as though the status quo is kind of okay, and we're in a free and democratic society where we're getting a bit of open data, and we don't really need to do all that much. Russell Haque actually has another sentence which I just want to read out here, which is that every problem interacts with other problems and is therefore part of a set of interrelated problems, a system of problems. I choose to call such a system a mess. And that's actually why I refer to messy cities. Because a city is a mess. It's not simply an infrastructure. And praying to the algorithm god in your data infrastructure isn't going to just solve the problem. Because actually, a city is not even a problem to be solved. We need to understand that cities are super wicked. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with this term of wicked problems. I think I have a list here. This is a definition by Riddle and Weber from 1973. Wicked problems are basically so wicked that you can't even define what a wicked problem is. Wicked problems have no stopping rule. They're essentially problems that are so difficult that they cannot be formulated or answered in any easy way. There's a bunch of things here which I won't bother reading out. An amendment to this was made by, I'm totally blanking on his name, in the last 4 or 5 years, called super wicked problems, which are wicked problems in which time is running out, where there's no central authority that can address the problem, where the solution that those who actually cause the problem might be seeking to create the solution, and where you actually discount the ability of the future or the consequence on the future, and therefore you result in sort of irrational decisions. And he was applying that to climate change, but I think this in general can be applied to cities. Fundamentally, the thing that concerns me most is that a lot of the rhetoric around data and open data and basically wiring up our cities and making them more efficient, it sounds exactly like the rhetoric that was coming out in the 50s and 60s that gave rise to things like highways and high-rises, which we're now counting the environmental and social costs of. But there is an alternative, and that's, of course, what I'm interested in. What else might be done? And funnily enough, it actually comes out of the Enlightenment as well. There was a street in London called Grub Street. How many people know about Grub Street? So Grub Street, which is there on the map, is actually not far from my office. My office is here in Old Street in London. And if you zoom in to near to Moorfields, there is a little area which no longer is a road, which is known as Grub Street. So it's been paved over, probably knocked down many times, buildings built on top. And Grub Street was a bit of a squalid, grubby kind of area of London, where the poets and pamphleteers and libellists lived and worked. This is where the hacks lived and worked. And I use the word hack in a very different way to the way it's normally used in design and technology. These are the people who are writing things that basically thumb their noses at authority. And if you're familiar with the contrast that D'Alembert once wrote about and this was actually during the Enlightenment, the idea that there was the truly enlightened public, and then there was the blind and noisy multitude. These folks kind of sat in between. They were, and here I'm quoting again, a formidable group in the war against church, nobility, monarchy, and the academies. It was essentially a kind of a pluralist, publishing, heterogeneous community of people who just didn't give a shit about authority. And I find this very interesting because it's almost like you could imagine this as a kind of an 18th century private eye, basically libeling the monarchs, the religious figures, and even other writers. There's so much squabbling going on in the text of Grub Street, of stealing articles from each other, republishing articles that you hadn't written, cribbing from writing that other people had already created. And so it leads to this idea of the coffee house mob. Here's an image from one of the sort of publications at the time, known as the Vulgus Britannicus. It gives rise to sort of images like this, of this kind of printing press and social phenomenon of these kind of devil-like characters in a literatory, which is where the publishing was going on, publishing these pamphlets. Now the reason it's so interesting to me is that this kind of squalid, grubby, messy part of London can be traced directly through the kind of percolation of ideas and through the skepticism towards authority to the French Revolution that came about in 1789. I'm going to just read out another little extract here from Darnton. While the philosophes grew fat in Voltaire's church, the revolutionary spirit passed to the lean and hungry men of Grub Street, to the cultural pariahs who through poverty and humiliation produced the Jacobinical version of Rousseauism. The crude pamphleteering of Grub Street was revolutionary in feeling as well as in message. It expressed the passion of men who hated the old regime in their guts, who ached with a hatred of it. It was from such visceral hatred, not from the refined abstractions of the contented cultural elite, that the extreme Jacobin revolution found its authentic voice. So this is what interests me, the idea of Grub City. With the smart cities that are coming about, I see it as absolutely inevitable that there's going to be a backlash of messiness in which the great uncalibrated, rather than the great unwashed, rise up and start being part of that measurement process, the data collection process, acting not just as subjects, passive subjects, receiving wisdom from data sets that have been collected and distributed by figures of authority. It's going to be members of the public who are actually taking into their own hands to create a kind of dirty data, if you like, and through that process of measurement, actually beginning to understand their effects on each other, on their own environments, and on the way that they can actually operate across these environments. It's through the measurement process that we actually build up intuitions about how we operate in this world. It's through the process of measurement that we're actually able to start to question how and why and where data from others came about. So in Grub City, I'm going to see people mocking the rationalization, the homogenizing attempts of the sort of the seamless data sets that smart cities like Songdo want to give rise to. In a booklet called Urban Versioning System that I wrote with Matthew Fuller, we talked about rubbish being the root of virtuosity, because you need this kind of the plethora of interpretations and views in order to give rise to any notion of virtuosity. So Grub City is going to be inhabited by people who are actually crafting and performing their data badly. So this is a call to action, really. To reject infrastructures, to reject homogeneity, to reject the data deities, to embrace these kind of super wicked urban problems, not try and simply reverse engineer solutions, to rewrite the explanations and understandings and attempts to control, and to thrive on the kind of contradictions, the very inherent contradictions that make a city most interesting and most appealing. Because it's only by building messy cities, I think, that we actually find the richness that makes cities that are worth living. So long live Grub City. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Usman. This was really a great presentation to put a broader context of what we're talking, and I think we're going to go a little back from the manifesto to the case study, back and forth with the next speaker. Scott Cain from Technology Strategy Board is actually involved in an important initiative in the UK context, the Future Cities Demonstrator Program. There's not that much that actually we still know of what this is going to be throughout the next years, but throughout the last year and a half, a path has been built that has led to the work that is going to be developed in Glasgow. Scott is going to put this example in the center of the discussion so that we can carry on with it later. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. So to the call to arms, we're going to try and find some underlying evidence of what actually is going on. My name is Scott Cain. I'm a founder of something called the Long Run Venture. But for the purpose of today, I'm here to talk about some work that I'm doing for the Technology Strategy Board, which is a quanga. It's a publicly funded entity, and it seeks to help UK firms grow market share in large global market opportunities. So I'm going to talk about two things. The first thing was something we launched, or announced rather, a year ago in the last budget, which was that we were going to have something called a Future Cities Catapult, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that. And then also, as been alluded to, we're running a Future Cities program, and part of that is a Future Cities demonstrator. So this is to essentially a competition to give a city in the UK £24 million to test actually what happens when you integrate your city systems more effectively. To develop these two ideas, we interviewed about 300 city leaders all over the world, a bunch of academics, and a bunch of firms that are seeking to meet the needs of cities. So some very small, dynamic firms, some of the bigger beasts. And that helped us develop an idea around, a central idea, an underlying idea around integration. So integration at the level of technology, which is the obvious bit, but actually also integration at the level of finance, integration at the level of bottom-up citizen engagement, and integration at the level of governance, which, if you're somebody leading a city, you're the mayor or something of that type, it's a big factor. So we're also talking about integration at the level of the different systems of a city. So it's energy, water, waste, health, and so forth. And historically, both firms and cities have cut up their budgets to say, okay, we're going to have a team that focuses on transport, or we're going to have a team that focuses on education. And they do so in relative isolation from each other. But for a whole bunch of reasons to do with changing the economy, and also some academic evidence to suggest that actually if you bring those things together, you can get a better return on your investment, they are becoming more open to the idea of a more integrated systems of systems approach in terms of how they govern the city. What city leaders say, so this is pretty much universal, is that they're all striving for a strong economy. They want jobs. They want high-value jobs in their cities. They want it to be a good place to live, otherwise the most talented people up sticks and move somewhere else. And they want a reduced environmental footprint. And sometimes that's a kind of philosophical buy-in to the fact that there is changing climate. And sometimes, so for instance, if you're a place like Stoke-on-Trent, it's because you've got heavy industries and you're worried about those heavy industries upping sticks and moving somewhere else. So, but they're consistent. The thing that's probably most relevant we'll pick up later is around, historically, when you try to develop an integration strategy, a major infrastructure project in a city, it is largely done and then been imposed top down. It's almost been that the people of that city are an afterthought after the big players have got together, and that is fundamentally wrong. So for the TSB, we exist to try and help UK firms grow, grow market share. So whilst UK cities matter, they're actually only a very tiny part of a much bigger global market opportunity. So this integration layer, this we believe is a new economic opportunity and something that UK firms are well placed to go after. We done some research around this. We believe it's of the order of a market of around £200 billion a year by 2030. It's around 50 billion right now. And the UK is really well placed to go after this. It's got firms that it's already a world leader in master planning, designing, architecture, the ICT underpinning, finance, project finance for major projects, the kind of the legal services that you do to do big deals in most urban projects around the world are done in London. So there's a lot of assets that the UK already has that can be kind of pulled together and made to work harder. The demonstrator, so the second idea, so this is essentially the idea for a large-scale competition to find out actually what is going on and what works and what doesn't work. It's basically just about evidence. So there's a lot of talk, particularly from the major players in the market, about why you should invest as a city in a smart city solution. And probably worth pointing out, the reason we don't use smart cities is that we totally buy in the fact that if you instrument up a city, you release the data, there's this slightly flawed notion that that data will in itself be a panacea or sort out all your ills, which is obviously not true. So this is to find out, okay, if you can deploy the tools that are on the shelf today. This is not about new stuff. This investment this £24 million needs to be invested in the next 15 months. So it's only solutions that are on the shelf right today that can be deployed at a city scale. And so the sort of stuff that we were seeing earlier in the first presentation, there's been a lot of talk about what can be done, but actually none of it is happening anywhere in the world at the scale that you would like to see it happen at. So this is to test this. So our exam question was to cities in the UK, if you were to invest £24 million in integration across your city systems to deliver against a particular vision for your city and to address your particular challenges, what would you do? So we wore out a whole lot of shoe leather. I could write a pretty good guide for most cities in the UK, their particular problems and challenges, and also what makes them amazing. And they were pretty welcoming, because £24 million doesn't buy you much of a city, but with the sort of stuff that's going on in terms of most UK cities are facing a budget cut of the order of a third at the moment. So £24 million made them sit up and take notice. There's 64 what's called primary urban areas in the UK, 64 cities. So 50 entered. We ended up funding 30 with 50k each to develop a feasibility report. They didn't have enough resource internally to be able to develop their thinking, so we funded that stage. These are the 30 cities. They're quite diverse. If you want to see what their feasibility reports were, find out what they're planning to do, you just have to Google Future Cities SIG, and they're all published there. As you'd expect, there was a bunch of stuff around creating new value through data. Not with a great deal of understanding often, but a sense that if they release stuff, it might create value and it might sort stuff out for the future. But also, I think there's some quite interesting work about how you can provide services fundamentally differently, and some are very willing to try and pilot that stuff. So if that's something you're considering as a firm, there are many cities out there that are interested. There's a whole bunch of stuff around mobility, and in fact, the challenges of congestion in cities being a massive brake on UK cities' economy. A lot to do with adult social care and health. So you might not have seen it, but there's something called the Barnett Scissors of Doom, or the oh shit graph, which basically suggests that within about 7 to 10 years, all discretionary budgets from UK local authorities will go on adult social care. Nothing else can be funded. So that is a major call for the need for greater levels of innovation. And then there's a whole raft of stuff around energy, often to do with things like energy from waste, but also new energy ecosystems and the role that essentially data can play in that. There were 4 finalists, so there's Bristol, there was London, there was Peterborough, and there was Glasgow. All of them could well have been funded in their own right. But we picked Glasgow. We picked Glasgow for a number of reasons. Manchester was in the running as well, actually. We picked Glasgow because actually it's got a whole heap of really quite nasty challenges that the city faces. So things like, they call it affordable warmth, it's quite a polite term for a really high proportion of Glaswegians being in fuel poverty. So they believe that they can use integration across systems to address things like fuel poverty. High incidence of antisocial behaviour, so 40% of Glaswegians reported some form of antisocial behaviour last year. So there's also quite a staggering statistic, which is that life expectancy across the city varies by 28 years. So if you live in a posh bit of Glasgow, you'll live 28 years longer than if you live in the poor area of Glasgow. But there were some good reasons why they're around. So they've got a very good city leadership, which connects the academics through to the early stage firms, through to some of the bigger firms, through to the city council. And part of that is because it's one of those like chicken and egg things. They are running a big, high-profile event, and that kind of focuses people's minds. So you kind of put your fiefdoms to one side if you think, actually, unless we do this, we're going to embarrass the city. Or they won the right to host the Commonwealth Games because they had those things in place. It's not easy to tell. The catapult. So this is a new world-leading technology and innovation centre. That's what the blurb says. Came from 2 reports, one from Herman Hauser, who's kind of a major investor around Cambridge, and James Dyson. So a couple of people who know a little bit about innovation. Basically what they said is we need some world-class centres to help UK innovators push forward. It's one of a number of tools that the UK government tries to use to try and inspire and equip innovators to scale. It happens to be the newest, but actually it's relatively modestly funded. It's £200 million over the course of this Parliament, which in the context of things like research councils is not a lot. In terms of funding, it's a third. So the Technology Strategy Board is going to fund it to the tune of £10 million a year, but by the end of year 5, the investment case that we put together assumes that it will raise £10 million from other public sources and then £10 million from contracts with industry. These are the other catapult centres. So alongside future cities, there are other areas that there will be a catapult centre in, and in effect they're all high growth global markets. What are we doing with the catapult? So last week we announced that a bloke called Sir David King would be the chair. He was formerly the chief scientific advisor between 2000 and 2007, so he's a good bloke. And we announced that it would be in London, which went down quite badly in most other cities, but there was a prolonged and extended evidence base which suggests that if you're going to go after a global market of seeking to meet the needs of the world cities, then there is only one world city in the UK, probably only one world city in Europe, and that is London. So what are we doing? So we've got the business plan in place, got the funding secured. We're now, the next couple of weeks, hiring a CEO, put a team in place, determine whereabouts in London it will be based, and then building out 3 key capabilities. So those capabilities all represent actually a barrier to the market scaling. So there's a Future Cities laboratory, there's a Future Cities open platform, and there's Future Cities finance. So what's the lab? Well, it's definitely not this for cities. It's not this either. But the lab could involve something a little bit like this, which in essence, it's the idea that you can set up and run a large-scale demonstrator anywhere in the world, so in any city anywhere in the world. At the moment, some of the major players are trying to sell these things to the world cities, and they're not buying them. And they're not buying them because they don't trust the major firms, they don't want to get any kind of technology lock-in, and they don't want to pay the amount that they're being asked to pay. So if you can provide them essentially a way of doing it in a much lower cost, a much less time-intensive commitment, and in a way that is much more flexible, then we think certain cities, not just in the UK but globally, will begin to pilot stuff, get the evidence base, and then they can decide whether they want to invest in it themselves. It is fundamentally cross-discipline. It looks like it's a techie centre, but that's not the idea. I couldn't find a picture of anything better. But the idea is that you would have anthropologists and behavioural scientists every bit there, as much as data scientists and engineers. That's the cross-discipline team. And that would work with anywhere. Lots of different cities in the world. It is also about telling a story. So I think the firms that are seeking to serve this market have done a particularly bad job explaining why their products and services can help cities work better. And you need to work fundamentally much more from the point of chaos that was made earlier, the messiness, the complexity, and you need to kind of rejoice in that. But you also need to say, okay, well, actually, there are new ways, new economic opportunities in trying to help cities function more effectively and help to provide services that people actually want. The second thing is called the open platform, which basically is when we spoke to these cities, what they said is they are already doing multi-system integration projects. So energy, water and waste, for example, quite often come together, or transport and health. And the learning from those often sits in the laptop of somebody from a high-value consultancy, you know, an Arup or an Atkins or something like that, or an internal team. And when that project finishes, they don't know what to do with the data. They don't know what to do with it. So they basically hand over their laptop to somebody, they get stuck in a drawer, someone else joins, they need to cleanse the data, give the laptop back to somebody, and essentially that learning is lost. And so the idea behind the open platform is to try and tease out and make visible the learning from those integration projects, so that people who are innovating new products and services can use that as the basis for their insight. And then the third thing, and again, it often comes down to this, is that even if you're a city that gets the idea of integration, and even if you have a belief that some natty technology, some natty combination of technologies could help you do what you want to do better, then cities don't have the funds to invest at the scale that is required. So the third key capability for the catapult is actually about financial innovation, something that the UK is quite good at. It's often not really done with a great deal of social purpose. So the idea is to try and pull through some city grandees and some high caliber secondees, and then trying to get them to apply their tools and techniques in a much more productive way. It'll have stuff like this, so a kind of hub type element, so early stage firms can engage and work from it. And well, that's it from me. There's the team. If any of you are interested in either Glasgow or the catapult, just get in touch with me and I'll put you in touch with the teams. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I wanted to get all the panel on stage so I can start the discussion about also what I would think the really broad ideological and even political context in which many of these discourses are grounded today, and how they're becoming in specific forms of practice, and how they establish certain kinds of relationship between industry and citizens. The floor is open, and I would really expect to be a lot of ideas being put on the table. And I think there's one hand there in the back.
Hello? Oh, hi. You might have to bear with me as I kind of formulate what I want to say into a question. I mean, I guess a lot of this concerns me, and Usman, thanks very much for your talk. It was really fantastic. I'm kind of worried that this is all kind of moving towards this sort of aping after some kind of science fiction utopia, and you know, I love sci-fi and I hope people read science fiction, but haven't we learned some lessons from that? I think, like, within the context of what's happening in the country at the minute in terms of cities and how people, the conditions under which people are living, are we, the kind of the investments that are being made in sort of sustaining a city and an infrastructure rather than sustaining people and human beings is massively problematic in my personal opinion. But yes, I just wanted to see if someone could respond to that, please.
I would say that it's interesting because it seems like every time there's been any kind of science fiction prediction of what's coming next, it's been wrong. And so I'm not perhaps quite as pessimistic of there being this kind of science fiction outlook right now, because I just don't think it's going to come about. I don't believe in the singularity, for example. I don't believe that, as I've kind of made clear, I think, in my talk, that there is going to be this kind of seamlessness that's perhaps pined after in some circles. I am, however, very concerned about whether or not we'll actually be around in 50 years at all. I think that's almost more pressing to me, considering how badly we managed to screw some things up, than perhaps the quality of our cities, because I think that might actually overtake where we're going. But you know, I think that specifically in this kind of idea of predicting the future, or of sort of imagining what's coming next, the optimism for me comes from the fact that we always manage to subvert that somehow.
Yeah, I think for me your comment was one of the things that I wanted to point out in my talk as well. I think there is a difference between city management and city making, whereas a lot of the smart city technologies and scenarios are really about city management, about managing infrastructure more efficient, etc., etc. And I mean, that's not necessarily a bad thing. You know, I prefer efficient public transportation to messy public transportation in that case. But at the same time, it's a very limited idea for the city. I mean, I completely agree with Usman, who says that, you know, a city is a very wicked problem. Actually, it's all those people with different ideas and backgrounds and goals trying to live together. And you know, if you take it into account, it's actually surprising that cities are actually functioning as they do. I mean, they might not all be completely just, and there's a lot of room for improvement, but they're still, in a way, they function as wicked problems as they do. And I think what my interest in this is you know, how we can use those new technologies, maybe hacking is a word, or maybe appropriating is a word, to actually use them for city making. So where we can use those tools ourselves to maybe make conservation visible in new ways, or organize people around them, and organize them into actions or change things. So I think there is room for that, even though, you know, the dominant paradigm is this scenario of the future city. But you know, as we've pointed out, I mean, and you as well, it's still a scenario. I mean, Songdo is still, it's a smart city only on paper so far. So I think, I mean, there's also reason for some optimism.
But just picking up on something you said there, the idea of efficient transportation, just to take one of the things, efficient transportation and being able to get to work on time and catching a bus as you get off the train has been in existence in Japan for decades. This is not a technological issue, it's a socio-political issue that is actually deeply ingrained in a culture of that kind of approach. And so if we are sort of expecting that to come about in the cities that we exist in, say in this country, then we are talking about a radically different social construct.
So my personal view is that kind of smart as a concept will pretty much wither and die fairly soon. I think that, I mean, if you're saying kind of by using the word future, that suggests some kind of science fiction element to people's thinking, I think that's probably fair enough. It's quite hard to not think too far in the future if you're having to work out fundamental infrastructure challenges. So it's pretty well documented that we have pretty old, creaky infrastructure in the UK. Roads, sewers, they're pretty well optimised. we're pretty admired for optimising them to the level that we do, but they do need to be invested in. So they need to be invested in not at the expense of people, they need to be invested in because otherwise they fundamentally won't work. And if you have no sewers, or if your sewers can't accommodate rainflow when it's increased, or whatever else it is, then people will up sticks and move to a different country. So I think you have to look quite far ahead, but not in a science fiction kind of way.
Yeah, no, because, well, we have a tsunami of questions. So.
I got the mic first, so I'm going to jump in. I would like to challenge the idea, the methodological presumptions about how and who produces the city. I'm just kind of shocked and horrified by the idea that $50,000 is given to cities to think about the issue of how one would, it just shocks me, right, as a methodological choice, which I think is emblematic of another idea about how, or what we have learned in coming from an engineering background and coming from the engineering of cities, which pre-digital technologies, the one kind of fundamental lesson that we've learned is the predictive power of city engineers is not what they are planning for, right? So building bridges and roads that last for 50 years, that have, and that pay out over 50 years, has proven to be both intellectually and now morally irresponsible, right? Because we don't have that kind of predictive power. So we do have the option, and in terms of engineering, intellectually we're moving to this guided simulation where we have an evidence-driven approach that is much more built around evidence, right? Small-scale experiments that can be scaled and demonstrated and are only designed to last for years, a handful of years, and have a succession planning or succession design. So ideas that are fundamental to contemporary engineering design, how we reimagine and redesign our relationship to water systems, for instance. We're living with legacy systems that I would argue are radically inappropriate, and we are radically unable to redesign them because of the technology lock-in issues. So there's a kind of methodological crisis that we face in terms of who and how we design cities. And I don't know, and this is actually a challenge to Usman's formulation of the wicked problem, that if we call them wicked, or if, that is a methodological option either. I mean, I think it's very clear that the speaker who talked about the 28-year difference in life expectancy, that's an issue that we can all agree is a fundamental design challenge. It is a wicked problem, but to call it a wicked problem is to say we can and should be accountable to the health of citizens. We can and should be accountable to air quality and the association with diabetes and respiratory illness and the asthma epidemic and the obesity epidemic. So we can actually find ways to formulate these collective problems in ways that we can act on them and be held accountable to them and generate evidence for and about them. And we can draw on new forms of design, technological design, that don't recapitulate the engineering cities with these huge investments at scales that we don't have the capacity to understand or predict with, and with technologies that don't have the stability or the appropriateness for more than a year or two in advance. So that's kind of a methodological challenge. How does one then move forward? How does one design? How does one make a choice of a problem to work on? If we reject smart cities, if we reject efficiency, if we reject even wickedness or too complex, how do we hold it accountable to small-scale evidence that means something to, me, my children, my friends, my city?
I think for me, I'm going to use an analogy here, which is not carefully thought out, so might not hold up. No pun intended, because the analogy that's coming. In the 60s, I think that in the architecture profession, we discovered that it was possible to build buildings that didn't have a structure in the way that we previously thought. In other words, prior to that, we thought of these massive, the requirement for what you might call infrastructure, columns and walls and what have you. And especially in the 60s, the sort of redefinition of architecture that was temporary and fluid and dynamic and based on inflatables where there was no infrastructure. I just wonder whether there's a need in a similar sense in the kind of cities of the future, in these sort of data-oriented cities, where there's a similar need for something where there is no infrastructure, where there is no sort of single, solid, upholding principle behind it, and instead it's a sort of clash. I have no idea what this would look like, and this is a little ironic coming from somebody who built a data infrastructure. But I think that what I'm recognizing is that the infrastructure itself is not necessarily needed for the kinds of things you're describing.
Is this on? There we go. A number of people today have juxtaposed this clean, cold, corporate, efficient infrastructure against something that's messy, human and improvised. Isn't that binary choice just kind of false?
Yes, of course it's false. I think we will have both at the same time. It's just that what I was trying to point out is that in the dominant discourse around this, and where is most of the innovation and research budget, where are they allocated? That's on the making cities more efficient. And this other part, how do we sustain or use the same technologies for city making, so to speak, so to make everyday life for humans better. I mean, there is lots of experiments there, but I think that deserves more attention than it does. It's also very hard because all the examples that I know, most of them are artist projects, and they're interesting for what they do, but they don't scale very well so far, for example. But I do see the opportunities, on various levels of what these new technologies can do to improve city making. I just haven't seen really the examples that are, very convincing as they have played out. But then, of course, we haven't seen the examples that are very convincing on the smart cities as well, on the scenario so far. But I think that in the whole research, and it's important to stress that aspect as an alternative or as an addition to the other one.
If I can just take on as well. So from an investor perspective, which is kind of the angle that I would take on it, then I think there's just a fundamental lack of evidence base. There's not a sufficiently compelling ROI to determine whether you should invest in solution X versus solution Y. And so as a result of that, it's very tough for people to make a decision as to what they want to invest in. Now, absolutely there's going to be bottom-up, grassroots innovation, and that has to be fostered and encouraged, and that's what most cities are clearly trying to encourage. But equally, you, as a kind of city convener of solutions, it's a kind of, in a democratic situation where you elect people to try and sort out stuff for you, then you then have to make choices, because you're often facing limited budget to make those choices with, and you just don't know what's the best thing to do out of the choices at the moment. So what we're trying to do, I think, and what is fundamentally necessary, is to try and find out if the, what happens over a longer period of time by investing in Y versus X. And at the moment, it's all just spiel. Nobody really knows.
First rows now.
I just wanted to tell two very quick stories about the difference between the kind of smart city and the messy city, and then a question about why one scales and one doesn't, I think. So there was in Leeds a social sciences demonstrator, and one of the most egregious examples that I saw in that was a riot simulator which projected a map of the city of Greater London, and some little Lego police that you could go and put on the map to quash riots. And it showed how by using your overwhelming force of Lego police you'd be able to squash the computer model rioters and stop further riots from breaking out. And at the end you were scored on how much property damage you averted, which I thought was an interesting high score in the game. Leeds was a city that didn't riot, and the reason Leeds didn't riot I think is much more interesting. It's because the districts where there was tension had riots in the past. Community leaders knew the price that they would pay if the same happened again. They went out, the police actually held back. They didn't send their Lego men in, they held back and let community leaders go in and diffuse the tension, speaking person to person. And we didn't get the attention, we didn't have to do the riot clean-up because we didn't have a riot. And of course, you know, the computer system that helps you predict where riots are going to take place is scalable, sellable to police forces around the world. The training and development of community organisers and youth work and all the things that have gone on in the Chapeltown district of Leeds are very specific to us and are all about stories that are very unique to our city. So I do think there's a problem if what we're seeking out is scale, that is inherently going to bias us towards some solutions which may not be the optimal solutions for the communities that we have.
So I agree. I would totally agree with everything you said. I think it's a bit of the case of the kind of dog that didn't bite. So it's quite hard to put your finger on precisely why there weren't riots in Leeds, I would say. You know, there was some quite interesting work that my space syntax, I don't know if you've come across them, which was to do with a number of factors that they pointed to which made it consistent case for why there might be a riot in a particular place. But to your overall point about, okay, well, do you invest in more community organisers or do you invest in more police? It's a choice. There isn't, unfortunately, the evidence base to say one is right and one is wrong. And so, equally, city leaders will bring in a political philosophy, a kind of a view of how they see the world, and therefore they'll make choices on the basis of that. It's just hopeful that, you have to be hopeful that if they're democratically elected, that they will make decisions that are, reflect the people that have voted into those positions in the first place.
I bet it was space syntax that actually created the algorithm behind that piece of software.
Well, yeah, not really that.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly the kind of work that they do. So, with these kinds of systems, you don't ask the question of, beyond the parameter of police repressing a riot. All of these systems don't allow you to ask questions that are a little bit more difficult to ask. I think that's kind of your point, isn't it?
I think that one scale is the other doesn't. And what we're looking for is the solution that scales. We always go down one
I don't think it's necessarily scale, it's actually the choice of an evidence base to make a choice. And so, I don't know the Leeds chief exec quite so well, but John Mothersole in Sheffield, he's not looking to replicate solutions that have been deployed elsewhere. He's trying to fundamentally find solutions that will meet the particular conditions of Sheffield. So when we set up the demonstrator, we didn't say, here's the answer that we're looking for. We said, actually, you know what the priorities are for your city. You know what the people who live there are saying that they want to have addressed first and foremost. Glaswegians wanted fuel poverty addressed. That was what people got elected on the basis of saying they were going to defeat. In Sheffield, they have a different set of priorities. So it's whether you believe in the kind of the governance structure as it currently is, and then the basis that if you can give them some information, whatever that information is, with some evidence base to support it, that they will make better decisions. I don't know, some will and some won't.
Hello. I'm interested in creativity and social justice. So one of the phrases that was very resonant for me, at least this morning, was the one about, or this afternoon, was about engaging in and empowering publics, groups of people, to act on communally shared issues. That really rang a bell for me, because it seems to me maybe some of the questions are, what sort of places do we want to create? What aspects of now do we actually want to embed and to nurture and to grow? Because I always find the argument very problem-focused rather than looking for what is good in the now. And I suppose for me it's more about how do we use these data technologies, these measurements, social media, to enable those conversations between the yous and the me's and those with the power and the decision, to make decisions in the cultures we live in. How do we use those technologies to enable those conversations to take place and for us to be able to choose the good enough answers to the where do we put our priorities? Because there's never a fixed answer, change is constant, all of that kind of stuff. But it seems to me these technologies could actually be part of transforming our democratic process, not just measuring our data and enabling large-scale corporations to, I think the term is monetize the technologies to solve problems for the few, is it for the 1%, whilst the 99% continue to be the ones that are left out of the picture. So I'm just interested in really flipping the picture to how can these technologies address that conversation between us as a social entity and community.
It's a good point. I think social media is used for that. I mean, to my mind, that's precisely what it's used for already. I don't think there is a kind of a new anything that is therefore required. You just have to listen and engage with it, I suspect. But yeah, I think it is human nature to focus on what is wrong and therefore try to find a solution to it. But yeah, I think there's also a good degree of celebrating and rejoicing, and if you live in a particular place and there's something good about it, then you tend to feel rightly or wrongly quite proud of it, whether you're directly responsible for it or not.
No, of course I agree with you very much, but it's also the 1 million or maybe the $1 billion question. I mean, that's really the one that's hard to answer, and that was also what I meant. Maybe to come back to the former question, about skill. I didn't mean how do you make maybe one system and then roll it out countrywide, but really how do you design a system. Well, for example, one of the promises of these new media technologies is that, as you pointed out as well, we can collect data, we can even do it ourselves rather than rely on government data. And then once we have that data, that gives us some insights on problems, maybe even on an even distribution of wealth in the city, or on the environment, or on a project like Trash Track from MIT, what happens with our trash. So we really can bring out those issues with new kinds of data. But then, okay, then we have the data. So how do we actually then next engage people beyond maybe the 4 or 5 people who are really concerned? And I think new media do have some. They allow for organization, but I mean they're not. In the end, it's not a technology question. We can use these technologies, but the technology themselves are not an answer to the problems that we have.
Hi, I'm Frank Risen. I wanted to link the first and the last speaker together. And I wanted to ask Scott if he has to think of a metaphor or a dominant idea behind what the Catapult project is trying to achieve. Which of the 3 cities that could be metaphors for a future mostly resemble or resound to his vision on what the Catapult project will amount to? And I was also wondering why he thinks that specific vision is the one we should aim for now.
So probably the coward answer is that I don't have a vision for a city. And instead what the Catapult Centre will focus on, and what I'm focusing on in playing a part in that, is how can you help firms, businesses, startups, whatever it is, multinationals, I'm relatively agnostic about which of those it is, develop the products and services that meet the needs of the customer. In this instance, that might be a city, or it could be a private sector provider providing a solution in a city. And so, at the moment, I don't think that particular customer need is well met. And so, the only excuse for putting UK public funds in is to say, actually, we think we've got some skills here that we can bring together in a slightly different way, and then that should then help private sector of whatever shape or flavour provide the solutions to meet whatever vision a city has for itself.
Yeah, I think we're right on time, or a little bit. We have to close this session. Thanks a lot for this really vivid discussion. We have a break now, and we are in 30 minutes back for the last sessions of the day. Thank you.